Well, hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson. Hope you had a great weekend, and it's good to be with you on this Monday, February 7th. And tonight, we're talking about moving forward. More states are preparing to drop some COVID protocols, like mask mandates, including in schools. Who's making these big changes? And are you ready to leave those masks at home? Russian forces could soon move into Ukraine again with an array of battalions on its border. What did President Biden learn the last time Russia invaded Ukraine that might prevent this from happening again? Meanwhile, the new German Chancellor makes his first visit to the White House. He addressed critics who say he's not moving fast enough to help stand up to Russia.
We are absolutely united, and we will not taking different steps. We will do the same steps, and they will be very, very hard to Russia, and they should understand.
And you might be eligible for a large sum of money from the federal government. Discrimination kept some survivor benefits out of people's hands. We'll tell you who's eligible and how to apply. How about we start off your Monday with some good news? Because believe it or not, pandemic, some things are looking up. In the last 2 weeks, the U.S. has seen nearly a 57% decline in cases. 57%. The trend line for hospitalizations is also inching downwards, though, to be fair, many hospitals are still quite overwhelmed. And new cases per day, as you can see, are declining nationally. Now, because of these improvements, some states are starting to roll back their mask mandates. One state is doing so almost in time for the Super Bowl. We found out just before the show tonight that California announced it will end its indoor mask mandate for vaccinated people on February 15th. Again, this allows vaccinated people to unmask. Ahead of Super Bowl Sunday, the state is increasing its threshold for indoor mega events and for outdoor events. Now, vaccines or negative tests are required at indoor events with 1,000 people or more. For outdoor events with more than 10,000 people, vaccination is not required. Masks and negative tests are still recommended, though. California Governor Gavin Newsom cited the state's declining case rate as a rationale for the rollback. But he did note, to be clear, unvaccinated people still have to wear masks. Now, California was just the latest state to end mask mandates today. In New Jersey, Governor Phil Murphy says masks will no longer be required in schools and daycares beginning on March 7th, 1 month from today. Governor Murphy did leave individual districts and facilities some flexibility.
We are not removing the ability of individual district leaders to maintain and enforce such a policy within their schools, or any private child care provider from maintaining such a policy within their business should community conditions require.
Meanwhile, in Connecticut, Governor Ned Lamont says their statewide mask mandate for schools will be lifted at the end of this month. He's also giving some latitude to local school boards to make masks a requirement if necessary. Also, Delaware is lifting its indoor mask mandate this Friday. Governor John Carney says schools will still require masks, but only until the end of March. After that, individual school districts will be able to make their own decisions. So, California, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, what do these governors have in common? Among other things, they are all Democrats. And so far, we've mostly heard Republican governors pulling back mandates when cases were still rising. Illinois also has a Democratic governor, but things have not been so smooth there. Late on Friday, a lower court judge ruled to suspend mask mandates in Illinois schools. Districts spent much of this weekend trying to figure out whether students need to wear masks today or not. Ultimately, different districts handled it differently. At least one district just canceled classes altogether. Different states, different parties in power, different approaches. What is the right way to go about this? Is now the right time to eliminate mask mandates? Let's get into that with NBC News medical contributor, Dr. Kavita Patel. Dr. Patel, welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Joshua. Good to see you.
So what do you think of these changes to the mask rules in a number of states so far? Based on what the evidence looks like, at least their governors believe that now is the right time to start planning for those changes or to start making them right away?
Yeah, Joshua, look, I think planning for these changes is exactly the right tone to strike. I do not think that getting rid of these masks, and especially in our schools, particularly daycares or even where we have young children, where the vaccine uptake rate in the under 12 population, Joshua, is really low. In some states, for example, in California, only about 21% of children 5 to 11. Under the age of 5, as you know, we don't even have a vaccine option. So here's what's troubling. If you go to cdc.gov and look under their COVID transmission map, the entire country is lit up red. So we are seeing declines. That is good news, as you started with. But we are still at the number of cases per day, Joshua, that we had at the peak of Delta. So we're not out of this yet. So a little bit more stability in these declines and having the options for all ages to get vaccinated, which we should see soon. That's when we can start to talk about lifting some restrictions. And honestly, masks should be last. That protects individuals, and that should be one of the last to go.
I do want to note, by the way, since you mentioned that, Governor Murphy did say that he was going to take steps to prevent people from mistreating or bullying students who decide to continue to wear masks or whose families decide that they would keep their children masked. So this doesn't mean that masks have to disappear. It just means that they won't be required. And at least New Jersey has said it's going to take steps to prevent kids from being ostracized or bullied because they end up continuing to wear masks. With regards to vaccination, though, Dr. Patel, we seem to be making progress toward getting vaccines approved for kids to use. At least those are beginning to become available. Now I guess the challenge is getting kids vaccinated.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the challenge all along, even with adults, right? And now we also complicate things by kind of telling people, well, you need a booster, and people are just confused. And I think this gets to my more central point. I think there's such a desire, social media, even talking, on television, to say no masks, all masks. The truth, the reality is that it's somewhere in between, that there are going to be situations, I think schools are one of them, Joshua, where we could see masks for the distant future, even if we have vaccines, only because we know this is airborne and we know that we have children who end up in the hospital, and we can prevent that. Now, if the vaccine rates go up, and I hope they will, then all of these things can get peeled off. But here's the other kind of what I was listening for. You mentioned it with California. I would love to also see an honest dialogue about what do we need to see kind of happen in the community in order to say, hey, these measures need to come back. And it should be some combination of positivity rates, hospital or health system capacity, and potentially, now that we have drugs that I can offer in the outpatient setting, how many prescriptions are we seeing written for these outpatient medications? Because that can also be an early signal of when cases are going up again.
What I'm hoping, Dr. Patel, is that we don't end up with the kind of situation that we've seen before in the pandemic, where you have people who are out and about, they're in a large group setting, maybe a big event, and then there's this huge super spreader, and we end up taking 3 steps back where we had taken 1 step forward. It's not lost on me that California is announcing this the week of the Super Bowl. Like, we're about to have what, cross our fingers, will not turn into a massive super spreader event.
Yeah, and in all likelihood, given the requirements for vaccination and kind of to your comment that they're putting these restrictions in place, must be vaccinated for a certain capacity, in all likelihood, it will not be a super spreader event, especially because cases are coming down. But it does feel like this is the right time to remind people, again, our map is lit up red in terms of the numbers of cases that we're still seeing. And we are still seeing, unfortunately, as you know, people who are dying. We've had record numbers of deaths, and that takes time, obviously, so kind of what we call a lagging indicator. But it's not something that I think it's hard for people. We want something to look forward to, but saying, masks off today, especially in schools, is just, it's short of irresponsible in my mind.
And before I have to let you go, Dr. Patel, with regard to the pandemic, I've heard a number of people, depending on who you ask, saying that at this point we either are or are close to a phase where COVID is no longer just a pandemic, it is endemic. It's just a thing to live with, the way that we live with, say, the flu, where we just kind of expect some people are going to get it. Sadly, some people are going to die from it. You can vaccinate yourself from it. We have to just live with it. Are we there yet? Are we past the point where COVID can be defeated and we basically have to admit either defeat or a stalemate?
Yeah, I wish I could say we were there. It's too soon to tell because, as you kind of know, we need to still see not only that some of these sub-lineages, we've been talking about BA2 and some other variants, we need to determine that we're not still susceptible to reinfection, some of the data we're seeing out of the UK and other concerning trends. And then number two, I think we need to have higher vaccination rates. When you look at other countries, Sweden and Denmark and other places where they've kind of said, this is it, we're done with the pandemic phase, those countries have 85% or 81% and higher vaccination rates. We're nowhere near that, Joshua. So I want people to have something to look forward to. I look forward to having this kind of moment where we say, you know what, the worst was behind us. Today is not that day. And it's too soon to kind of, what I don't want to do is build up false hope, just as you pointed out, where we feel like we made one step forward and take 3 steps back. I want quarantines to come away. And by the way, there are actually not that many strict restrictions around the country. There's very little, kind of forcing people to stay at home. We're just asking people to wear a mask when they're in settings where they don't know if people are vaccinated. I don't think that's too much to ask from people.
Should also note, it's not too late to get vaccinated. You can go to planyourvaccine.com. We can point you to all the information you need to get vaccinated. Quickly, quietly, painlessly, only you and your doctor need to know. Does not have to become a political statement. But if we want to prevent this from becoming one of those things we live with, this is the way to get it done. Dr. Kavita Patel, always good to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The U.S. has seen plenty of really intense protests over COVID mandates, but nothing like what we're seeing right now in Canada. Check out what downtown Ottawa looked and sounded like today. That's a group of truckers called the Freedom Convoy. They've been protesting vaccine mandates for 11 days now. These protests target mandates for truckers who are crossing the U.S.-Canada border. They've evolved into a larger critique of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's COVID policies. And there you see them protesting around Parliament Hill in Ottawa. Hundreds of truckers are blocking the city streets day and night, and the mayor of Ottawa has declared a state of emergency. In a statement issued yesterday, the mayor said, quote, declaring a state of emergency reflects the serious danger and threat to the safety and security of residents posed by the ongoing demonstrations and highlights the need for support from other jurisdictions and levels of government, unquote. And these protests are drawing support from Republican politicians in the U.S., including former President Trump. NBC's Maura Barrett joins us now with the latest. Maura, where do things stand right now?
So, Joshua, day 11, these protests are still very much happening. They have dwindled a bit since the original weekend. The weekend before last, there were tens of thousands of truckers and protesters. This weekend, it was down to a couple thousand. And right now, as far as we know, there's about 500 trucks in downtown Ottawa right now. A court did grant an injunction against those blaring horns that you heard right there for the next 10 days, hoping that this will limit the activity and hopefully save some of the sanity of the people that live in the general area and work in that area as well. And as we speak, actually, the House of Commons is hearing an emergency debate about the protests, because this is a political issue in Canada, too, just like we've seen here in the U.S. And so this is something that has caused chaos in the downtown area, a lot of holdup in medications being delivered, people seeking out hospitalizations for anxiety, grocery store workers reporting that people who are protesting are getting really aggressive, spitting in their faces when they're being asked to wear a mask. And so clearly this has escalated beyond just that anti-vaccine mandate that this protest originally started from, Joshua.
So you've got Prime Minister Justin Trudeau speaking before the House of Commons tonight, and you have this Freedom Convoy clearly demanding an end to the vaccine mandates. What exactly do they want? Have they talked about what it would take to make this protest end?
Well, they say that they'll leave once the vaccine mandate is lifted. Now, Justin Trudeau has been very adamant that he does not plan on doing that. The city of Ottawa has asked for more support in terms of police staffing. They're calling for nearly 2,000 more people to come and help alleviate the damage that they're seeing from the protesters. And like I said, it had dwindled a little bit over the weekend. The police issuing hundreds of tickets, making 20-plus arrests, and they actually took away the fuel where protesters were holding filling the truck fuel. So they're hoping to that this aggressive force the police are putting towards these protests will help, because, like I mentioned, Trudeau does not plan on lifting the mandate, and right now the Freedom Convoy is saying that is what they're looking to solve for. So clearly still very much at a standoff.
And Maura, we've been hearing from U.S. politicians about this. This has become kind of a cause célèbre for some conservative politicians here in the U.S. What are they saying about this?
Well, like the protests we saw against vaccine mandates, reopenings, the mask mandates in the U.S., it has become a fringe conservative viewpoint. And that's what Trudeau has called these truckers, these protesters as well, pointing out that 90% of truckers are vaccinated. So this is a very small section of Canadians that feel this way, but it's something that we've seen political discourse about here in the U.S. too, right? So Republican Steve Scalise, speaking out in support of the protests that we've seen. Like you mentioned, former President Trump calling out support as recently as this weekend, calling Justin Trudeau a far left lunatic. And so this is something that, like I said, has escalated beyond just the vaccine mandates, but they're protesting what they're opposing Justin Trudeau, his politics and his stances, and they're calling him too progressive. And so we've just seen this snowball, right? And it's just such a political conversation beyond the public health aspect. And we've actually seen President Trump even call for the Freedom Convoy to come down to Washington, D.C. So this discourse and disagreement over politics in this pandemic now crossing country borders.
Right. And I just want to confirm with you, Maura, it sounded like you said that 90% of truckers in Canada are indeed vaccinated. I heard you right on that, right?
That's what we've heard from the Canadian trade group representing truckers, and what Trudeau and the Canadians have been putting out as well, saying that they've at least gotten one dose of the vaccine. Yes.
Gotcha. Thank you, Maura. That's NBC's Maura Barrett reporting from Chicago tonight on the unrest in downtown Ottawa. Still to come, President Biden hopes to protect Ukraine from invasion by using a gas pipeline as leverage. How would that hurt Moscow? And how close are we to another invasion? We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. Now, depending on who you ask, Russia could be very close to attacking Ukraine again. That is what the Biden administration says. Officials are warning that Russia could invade any day now. And that would be the second time in 8 years that Russian troops enter Ukrainian territory. Back in 2014, they invaded Crimea. That's a peninsula in southern Ukraine. U.S. intelligence officials say that if Russia launches a full-scale invasion, we could see up to 50,000 civilians killed or wounded within weeks. And that is why a growing number of top diplomats and heads of state are scrambling to prevent war. Today, France's President Emmanuel Macron made his push for peace in a face-to-face meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Mr. Putin said the talks were substantive and businesslike. And the new German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, made his first trip to Washington. He was quick to reject criticism that Germany has not done enough to support Ukraine. Back again with us is Michael McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Russia. He is the director of Stanford's Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies and an NBC News analyst. Ambassador McFaul, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
So what do you make of the moves that are going on right now, particularly in light of something that the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said yesterday? Listen to what he said.
We believe that the Russians have put in place the capabilities to mount a significant military operation into Ukraine, and we have been working hard to prepare a response. President Biden has rallied our allies. He's reinforced and reassured our partners on the eastern flank. He's provided material support to the Ukrainians, and he's offered the Russians a diplomatic path if that's what they choose instead.
So is this it? Is time kind of winding down?
I don't know. I still don't know. Jake Sullivan obviously doesn't know. I think the whole world doesn't know. We're waiting to see. I think on the capability side, there's no evidence whatsoever that Putin is backing down and reassessing. He's building up. There are more troops on Ukraine's borders today than there were just a few weeks ago, and those capabilities are on a readiness standby mode. They're getting ready for war. There's the map. At the same time, if you listen to what President Macron and Putin talked about in Moscow today, there were hints that they're going to keep talking about a new European security architecture. Sounds like there were some plans that Macron circulated that have not been made public. But if you listen to that dialogue, you would think that maybe they are looking for a way out of this military standoff. So I think the stakes are getting higher, but we still do not have a definitive decision one way or the other from the one guy that matters, Vladimir Putin.
Could we go back to that map for just a second, the one we were just looking at with the Russian troops and where they are positioned? Because I wonder if you could just talk us through what we might see. So there's Ukraine, that little peninsula sticking down at the bottom is Crimea. Russia is to the right, it's east of Ukraine. Kyiv, the capital city, is kind of north-central Russia. I wonder if we're talking about Russia invading and the rest of the world trying to jump in and stop the invasion. What's the strategy? Do we think that the Russians will just close in on all sides and Western nations would try to follow behind them across the border? Like, is it clear how that might go down?
Well, I think the Russian options are two or three, right? So one is invasion on all three sides and even through the sea. Given the naval capabilities they have, that's the massive invasion. A second, and I don't want to use the word incursion because it would be a military intervention, but would be to focus on the eastern part there where you have your map, right? The Donbass de facto has been under separatist control that are loyal to Moscow. One other scenario would be that they just seize that, declare that independent or declare it part of Russia. And a third in between would be what they call the land map, the land connection from Russia on your map all the way to Crimea. That territory used to be called it was called Novorossiya. It used to be part of the Russian Empire. That's the third scenario. I think in all three scenarios, there will be no troops from the West coming into Ukraine. There will be no troops from NATO coming into Ukraine. It'll be a fight between Russia and Ukraine. Russia has the giant military advantage. Ukraine, of course, has the advantage of defending territory rather than trying to take it. But I don't see any circumstances under which other countries would get involved.
So we've been hearing about world leaders. We had, the European Union High Representative who has spoken, the Secretary General of NATO, the European Council President Ursula von der Leyen. You've got Germany's Chancellor, France's President, who met with Vladimir Putin, that had a conversation that Putin described as businesslike and said that they were businesslike, useful, and substantive. Further said, and I'm quoting Putin, we have a good understanding that Macron visited Russia to speak about global and European security questions for which supporting our countries as permanent members of the UN Security Council is specially responsible. That's from Putin. Talk about the kind of leverage that might exist, Ambassador, before I got to let you go, particularly this gas pipeline that the president was talking about, that might be kind of a pressure point that the West could use to get back at Russia. How would that work?
Well, it's really interesting. On the same day that you have Macron in Moscow offering a carrot to talk about a new security arrangement in Europe, you have President Biden meeting with the Chancellor from Germany talking about cutting off the pipeline, Nord Stream 2. And I think he was pretty definitive. If you invade, we will take the financial means necessary, and we do have those capabilities through sanctions to cut off that pipeline. So you see the play, carrot in Moscow, stick in Washington.
Ambassador Michael McFaul, always good talking to you. I have a feeling this will not be our last conversation, and hopefully our conversations can remain on diplomacy rather than military strategy, but time will tell. Thanks for making time for us tonight. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, it's time to update you on a few of the stories we've been talking about on this program. You may remember on Friday, we had a very intense conversation with the father of Amir Locke, a young black man who was killed last week during a police raid. Now we're learning more about the warrants that were issued for that raid. Mr. Locke died after Minneapolis police executed a no-knock warrant. Body cam video shows the SWAT team entered an apartment with a key and announced their presence once they were moving inside. Amir Locke was not the target of the warrant, and he was asleep as the officers came in. Minneapolis was helping St. Paul with a murder investigation. A law enforcement source tells our Twin Cities affiliate KARE 11 News the St. Paul police did not originally ask for a no-knock warrant. Minneapolis PD reportedly insisted on a change to let them enter without knocking. Now, Minneapolis city leaders are taking another look at these no-knock raids. Mayor Jacob Frey joined city council members, professors, and civil rights attorneys for this conversation. The mayor issued a moratorium on these raids Friday evening, but not an outright ban. And crowds of people protested in Minneapolis this weekend. Demonstrators gathered downtown outside the Hennepin County Government Center, a few blocks from where Amir Locke was killed. In Georgia, Ahmaud Arbery was killed not by police, but by men who claimed they were trying to prevent a crime. Now, jury selection is underway in a federal hate crime trial against them. All three defendants were already convicted in the murder trial over Mr. Arbery's death. During that trial, prosecutors mostly avoided talking about race. Now, federal prosecutors will focus on how it may have factored into this crime. NBC's Blaine Alexander has an update.
Well, this is just day one of jury selection here at federal court in Brunswick, Georgia. We understand that it could go as long as 2 weeks. They've cast a pretty wide net in this jury selection. They've sent out more than 1,000 summons to 43 different counties. Those are all of the counties across the Southern District of Georgia. So some potential jurors drove as long as 4 hours just to get here today. It's going to certainly be a different kind of case than what we saw during the state trial, of course, because in this federal trial, this is a hate crimes charge that they're looking at. So race is going to be much more at the forefront than what we saw during the state trial. The prosecution now has the burden of essentially looking at the motivation behind what happened to Ahmaud Arbery. So they are going to try and prove that the defendants used racial animus and essentially were influenced by race, that they made an assumption based on Ahmaud Arbery's skin color, the fact that he was a black man, that ultimately led them to chase him down and kill him back in February of 2020. So we understand, again, jury selection could be going on for as long as 2 weeks. The trial will begin thereafter. But remember, all three of these men have already been convicted in a state court. Gregory and Travis McMichael sentenced to life in prison without parole, and William Roddy Bryan, of course, sentenced to life with the possibility of parole. Back to you.
Thank you, Blaine. That's NBC's Blaine Alexander reporting. We've also been following the controversy surrounding Spotify and its popular podcast host, Joe Rogan. Yesterday, the app CEO Daniel Ek sent a letter to employees apologizing for the controversy. In the letter, Mr. Ek said that he does not believe, quote, silencing Joe is the answer, unquote, and that he has spoken with Mr. Rogan and his team about, quote, some of the content in his show, including his history of using some racially insensitive language, unquote. Spotify has reportedly removed about 70 episodes of the podcast The Joe Rogan Experience, presumably over their content. On Saturday, Joe Rogan apologized for using the N-word in past episodes. That issue came up after singer-songwriter India Ari posted a video online with clips of him using that word. Now, she's just the latest artist to criticize him. Neil Young removed his songs from Spotify over vaccine misinformation in the podcast. He says he's refusing to stream on the app while the Joe Rogan Experience is there. A handful of other artists, including Joni Mitchell and India Ari, have followed his lead. The Voting Rights Act lost its enforcement power because of a Supreme Court case from Alabama. Now, the court has paved the way for Alabama's new congressional voting map, despite concerns of racial disenfranchisement. Justices voted 5-4 in favor of the new map. Chief Justice John Roberts sided with the three more liberal justices against the districts. The decision essentially puts on a hold on a lower court ruling. That lower court found that the Republican-drawn map could violate the Voting Rights Act by diluting black voting power. Last month, a special three-judge panel in Birmingham ruled unanimously against the map, ordering them redrawn for the primary in May. Now, the maps will stand. Up next, you or someone you know might be eligible for Social Security survivors benefits and might not know it. We'll tell you who can get those funds now, even if they had been denied before, when we come back. Same-sex marriage became the law of the land back in 2015. Since then, hundreds of thousands of same-sex couples have tied the knot. But discrimination remains, especially for gay and lesbian couples, because they have long been denied survivors' benefits. that had been limited to conventional married couples. Now, the Biden administration is trying to fix that. It has begun paying out large sums of money to surviving partners who previously were not allowed to get married. The problem is, not everyone who's eligible for a payout knows it. And even more challenging than that, a lot of these surviving partners are getting up in years. So it's a race against time to get them what they're owed before it's too late. This all came about because of lawsuits filed by the LGBTQ legal advocacy group Lambda Legal. And joining us now is a counsel for Lambda Legal, Peter Wren. Mr. Wren, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me, Joshua.
How did all of this come about?
Well, it really came about as a result of people in the community reaching out to us to explain that they were still suffering harm, as you mentioned, even though we had marriage equality in 2015. And the problem is that in order to receive Social Security survivors benefits, the Social Security Administration generally required people to be married for at least 9 months. And the problem for people in our community is that a number of couples were not able to be married for 9 months. In fact, many of them were not able to be married for even a single day because of discriminatory marriage laws that were on the books at the time. So what happened was that these surviving partners of same-sex relationships were really stuck between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, the government was telling them, well, you need to be married in order to get these benefits. But on the other hand, these couples were also told when they were both alive that they couldn't get married. And as a result of the successful class action lawsuits brought by Lambda Legal, there's now a pathway to benefits for people who have, until very recently, been wrongfully locked out of benefits through no fault of their own.
Before we get into that pathway to benefits, I wonder if you have any sense of how many of these kinds of legal loose ends there are. I mean, I think it was amazing for a lot of straight people to realize the cornucopia of benefits that gay people were locked out of just because we couldn't get married, and this kind of floodgate of things that become available once the law will recognize same-sex marriages. Are there still a lot of these benefits that are left in this unequal state?
I would say that Social Security survivors benefits are probably one of the main issues that couples were still facing even after marriage equality, because your access to benefits is determined by whether or not you were able to be married in the past. So even after marriage equality became the law of the land in 2015, that helped things for couples going forward, but not for the couples who were never able to walk down the aisle at all, for example, before one of them died. And these benefits in particular are incredibly important. They can make the difference between whether or not you're able to essentially live comfortably in your retirement years. And we know that there are so many people out there, potentially thousands, who stand to benefit from these recent legal developments, but are totally unaware of what's changed. And so it's an incredibly important part of our work going forward to get the word out to everyone who potentially may benefit from these legal wins that we've achieved.
All right, let's see if we can get this information out to people who would benefit from it. How do people know if they would be eligible for these benefits? Are there certain qualifications or, a list of things they might consider in terms of whether this might apply to them?
Sure. In a nutshell, people are now eligible for survivors benefits if they can show they would have qualified, but for the discriminatory marriage laws that stood in their way. So I can give an example of our client, Helen Thornton, who was a woman in Olympia, Washington, who was with her same-sex partner for 27 years. They met in the 1970s, and throughout that time, they were barred from marriage up through the point that Marge Brown, Helen's partner, passed away in 2006. And when Helen went to apply for Social Security survivors benefits when she turned 60 in 2015, she was turned away by the Social Security Administration. But as a result of the victories that we achieved in the lawsuits, she was able to receive past due benefits of more than $70,000, as well as nearly an extra $1,000 a month in Social Security survivors benefits. And the analysis essentially that the agency here engages in for applicants is determine whether or not discriminatory laws are the reason why they were prevented from qualifying for benefits. In Helen's case, they've been together.
I'm sorry to cut you short, but I know I got to let you go in just a second. I want to make sure we get the information out. For people who think that this applies to them, where should they go? What should they do? Who should they contact? Do they just contact Lambda Legal?
Two steps. The first step is that they can absolutely visit our website at lambdalegal.org, where there is a frequently asked questions document that can guide people through the application process. And the second step, and really this is the most important, is that people need to apply with the Social Security Administration. These benefits require people to take affirmative action in order for people to get what they're owed. And so that involves contacting your local Social Security field office to set up an appointment where the representatives have instructions that will allow them to help process your application.
So go to lambdalegal.org and contact your Social Security field office. Do both to get that process rolling. Peter Wren of Lambda Legal, I really appreciate you talking us through this tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joshua.
New York City public schools are launching a new lunch program. What students think so far about vegan Fridays, what you think about it, and how to get your kids to eat like that. Before we go. The reviews are in for the first Vegan Friday across New York City's public schools. So how did it go? Depends on who you ask. This was last week's offering. The press secretary for the school system tweeted photos saying every school served food made from scratch. No meat, no dairy, except milk. Milk has to stay on the menu by federal law. Officials say that non-vegan options are still available upon request. Vegan options are also available in every school daily. We asked for your opinion on these meals. Here's what Catherine and Marielle left in our inbox.
I think Vegan Fridays are a wonderful idea. Better for the environment, likely better for our health, offering more variety. Maybe the children would be exposed to more foods than they would normally be exposed to. And I think my children who introduced me to veganism would like it too. Terrific idea. Go for it.
And I think New York is doing an awesome job of putting Vegan Fridays for the children. That's a great way to get started on healthy, eating healthier for the children.
Catherine and Marielle, thank you both for sharing your opinions. Granted, not all the opinions are that glowing. Mohammed tweeted this picture from one New York school. He said that not a single kid ate the lunch on Friday. Mohammed writes, choices were between this and beans and corn tacos with wheat tortillas. Milk was the only beverage, not vegan, and an apple was the only side. Now, New York City school officials admit there's room for improvement. They say they're currently collecting feedback, and we're also told that the meals were taste tested by students. Joining us now is Angela Odoms-Young. She's a nutrition and food justice advocate and health equity researcher. She helped develop the nutrition standards for the National School Lunch Program. Professor Odoms-Young, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Can I just get the most happy to have you here. First of all, can I just get a very basic definition? What does vegan mean?
I think when you look at vegan, the definition is really plant-based. So the idea of having a meal that's plant-based, a lot of people use vegan, but that normally is used to characterize a certain lifestyle. Generally, a vegan diet is one that does not include meat or animal products, as you indicated, such as milk or eggs.
What do you make of some of these programs? New York, Boston has a similar program, Portland, LA. How are they going so far, in your view?
I think there is a lot of opportunity here. I know we talk about the kids are not eating the lunch, or we think about healthier lunches as not being desirable to kids, but I think it's in the implementation. And remember, a lot of these programs are new, and so they're still testing, looking at options that kids will eat. It's the same as what happens at home. What do? We try to serve something that's healthy Our kids may not eat that. They may eat something else. And so school lunch is very similar. The key is to try to infuse healthier options and then just keep trying to see what works. But it takes tweaking as these programs are implemented at a district level and at a national level.
New York Mayor Eric Adams spoke about this. He said that he changed to a plant-based diet in 2016. And earlier today, he announced another food program for adults and talked about the benefits of plant-based diets. Here's part of what the mayor said. Watch.
I'm encouraging New Yorkers to have as many plant-based meals as possible because the science is clear. The more you eat plants, the more you eat fruits, the more you have a healthy lifestyle away from over-processed food, the healthier you are going to be.
Now, I found out about this cut from my family, who has a family text group, and they had a good time with this because during this press conference, apparently Mayor Adams acknowledged that sometimes he also eats fish. So apparently he's not as plant-based as he says he is, and they thought that was hilarious. What about that? The difficulty of being able to stick to a diet like this, either because it can be hard to give up all flesh-based foods for some people, or concerns that it's going to just taste like you're eating the lawn 7 days a week and you're not going to enjoy having that kind of a diet?
I think the big focus is on more plant-based meals. So if you look at the dietary recommendations, the national recommendations, the dietary guidelines, which is what we use when we think about healthy meals, then the goal is really to eat more fruits and vegetables, more whole grains, nuts, seeds, and it can be a part of a very diverse diet. Some people go vegan, some people go vegetarian, some are pescatarian, and some people eat more fish and chicken. The idea is to eat healthier and try to incorporate fruits and vegetables into any diet that you choose. We have an issue in the United States where we don't eat enough fiber. And so it's important that we include those fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, and seeds so we can eat a diet that's consistent with a lower chronic disease risk. And so it's not, the dietary guidelines doesn't indicate you have to go completely plant-based, although some people make that choice. But we're pretty far, if you look at what we consume in America, we have a lot of room for improvement to increase our consumption of fruits and vegetables.
Yeah. And when I look at school lunches, I think about the impact on low-income kids, because the number of children, the percentage of children on free and reduced lunch is a metric for poverty. And a lot of kids in food deserts, that is where they're going to get whole grains, fruits, vegetables. They're going to get it in the school cafeteria because some of their parents may not have the means to acquire it, or the nearest grocery store may be too far away. Before I have to let you go, I wonder for parents who are not in that situation, who maybe have the choice of what they feed their kids day to day, what's your one best tip for making plant-based diets that kids will actually eat? Your one best tip for parents who'd like to give this a shot before we go.
Find out what your kids like and keep serving that, because I know even in my household, my daughter liked tomatoes, she liked cucumbers, and so we had cucumbers and we had tomatoes. Kids choose the foods that they like and find a fruit or vegetable that they like and allow it to be freely available in the refrigerator, easy to grab. Mandarin oranges, watermelon, whatever those foods are that they like, find a fruit or vegetable that they like, and then make sure that you have that freely available.
Angela Odoms-Young, I appreciate you making time to talk this through with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for making time for us. Remember to send us your questions for NBC Steve Patterson about the Olympic Games, including what life is like inside the COVID bubble. We are at NBC Now Tonight on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. You can leave us a voicemail, 888-575-2NBC, or email nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Great starting the week with you. Come on back tomorrow. But until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. See you then. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.